Melissa and I were already arguing when my mother-in-law put down her wine glass and said, "Claire, apologized to your sister-in-law." I looked at Patricia across the Christmas table for what? That was apparently the wrong answer. There were 11 of us, squeezed around Patricia and Robert's dining room table, with Christmas music playing softly from somewhere in the living room, and a ham sitting between two casserole dishes nobody had touched in 10 minutes. My 3-year-old daughter, Lucy, had reached for a glass angel hanging from the little decorative tree behind her chair. I'd caught her hand before she touched it. "I've got her, sweetheart," I said. Melissa had leaned back inside. "You always think you've got everything handled." I looked at her. "Excuse me, you heard me. Then say what you mean." Daniel, my husband, glanced at me from beside Lucy. "Claire." That one word irritated me more than it should have. Not because he was being rude, because I knew what it meant. "Please don't." For 12 years, that had been Daniel's preferred method of dealing with his family. Don't answer. Don't react. Don't give Mom anything to work with. It worked beautifully for everyone except me. Melissa shrugged. "I just think maybe if you watched her more closely, Mom wouldn't have to worry about Lucy breaking things." I was watching her. That's why she didn't touch it. There you go again. There I go doing what Patricia cut in. Enough, Melissa was trying to help. No, she wasn't. The table went quiet. Patricia stared at me. I'd seen that expression before. Usually, I backed off when it appeared. Christmas seemed like a particularly stupid night to stop. "Claire," she said, "you're embarrassing yourself." I almost laughed. "I'm sitting in a chair talking, Patricia. You're picking a fight in my home." Melissa made a comment about my parenting. She made an observation. Of course, she did. Melissa pushed her chair back an inch. "See, this is why nobody can say anything to you." I looked at her. "If you have something to say about how I raise my daughter, Melissa, say it clearly." Patricia's voice sharpened. "Apologize, no. I remember Robert saying, 'Patty, maybe we should just eat.'" Nobody listened to him. Patricia came around the table. I thought she was going to take Lucy into the living room. Instead, she stopped directly in front of me. "You have been disrespectful to this family since the day Daniel brought you into it." I stood because I suddenly hated having her tower over me. "I'm not apologizing because Melissa insulted me," and I answered her. The first slap came so quickly, I didn't understand what had happened until my face was turned toward the Christmas tree. Someone gasped. "Mom," Daniel said. Patricia slapped me again, then a third time. Not movie slaps, nothing dramatic. Just 3 ugly fast cracks from a 68-year-old woman who had decided she was allowed to put her hands on me. "You're trash," she spat. "My son deserves better." I heard Daniel's chair scrape behind me. Then Patricia pointed past me at Lucy. "Take that trash and get out." That was the moment the room changed. Lucy didn't know what trash meant. She knew Grandma was yelling. She knew her mother had just been hit, and she knew everybody had stopped moving. Her little face crumpled. "Mommy." Daniel was on his feet before I reached her. He grabbed Lucy's coat from the back of the chair, then took my hand. "Let's go." Patricia actually looked surprised. "Daniel, don't be ridiculous." He kept walking. "Daniel, nothing." I picked Lucy up, and she buried her face against my shoulder. Robert said, "Patty, enough." It was several minutes too late. Nobody followed us outside. The cold air felt good against my cheek. Daniel strapped Lucy into her car seat, while I stood beside the car holding her stuffed rabbit and realizing my hands were shaking. He came around to my side. "You okay?" "No." He nodded. At least he didn't tell me I was. We drove home without the radio. Halfway there, Lucy asked from the back seat, "Is Grandma mad at me?" I turned around so fast the seatbelt caught me. "No, baby." Daniel gripped the steering wheel. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. Lucy thought about that. Did Mommy Daniel look straight ahead? No. That answer came faster. At home, I took Lucy upstairs and ran her a bath. I let her use too much bubble bath because I was in no mood to enforce reasonable soap consumption. She was back to making a plastic mermaid swim around the tub within 10 minutes. 3-year-olds can sometimes recover faster than adults. I couldn't. When I came downstairs, Daniel was standing in the kitchen with his phone. I stopped in the hallway. "No, Dad, this isn't another family argument." Silence. Then Daniel said she hit Claire. Another pause. 3 times. His voice changed on the next sentence. "She called my 3-year-old daughter trash." I leaned against the doorway. Daniel listened for a while. Then he said something I didn't understand. "Tell her everything." He ended the call. "Tell her what?" He looked at me. "The house." I stared at him. "What about the house?" "I'll explain." I folded my arms. "That phrase has not had a great evening, Daniel." He gave a tired little nod. "Fair." Before he could say more, I asked the question that had been sitting in my throat since we left. "Why did it take this?" He knew exactly what I meant. "Claire. No, I'm glad you walked out with us, I am. But why did your mother have to hit me before you finally stopped telling me to ignore her?" He sat down. For once, there was no defense ready. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." He looked at the floor. "Lore, you just don't want to say it yet." Neither of us spoke after that. About 2 hours later, Lucy was asleep on the couch under her favorite fleece blanket. Christmas dinner had become peanut butter toast for me, and half a reheated burrito for Daniel. His phone rang. "Robert." Daniel answered. "Dad." I watched his expression change. Robert spoke for maybe 20 seconds. Then Daniel closed his eyes. "All right." He hung up. "What happened?" He rubbed his forehead. "My mother just found out." "Found out what?" Daniel looked over at our daughter, then back at me about the house, about Dad's money. He paused. "And that after what she did tonight, she doesn't get to decide when she sees Lucy anymore." That got my attention, because until that moment, I'd thought Christmas dinner was the explosion. I was beginning to understand it had only lit the fuse. Daniel didn't explain everything that night, mostly because Lucy woke up crying around midnight. And after that, Christmas became a blur of warm milk cartoon reindeer and two adults pretending the house wasn't full of tension. But the next morning, while Lucy sat cross-legged on the living room rug, opening the presents we'd brought home from Patricia's, Daniel finally told me what his father had said. "Mom knows about the gift." I looked up from a roll of torn wrapping paper, and she knows about the house that landed differently. For 6 years, Daniel and I had rented the same narrow townhouse with beige carpet, a tiny backyard, and one upstairs bathroom that always seemed to know exactly when 3 people needed it at once. We weren't poor. We weren't reckless. We were just ordinary people, trying to save enough money to buy a decent house without making ourselves miserable for the next 30 years. Patricia had never respected that. She had opinions about rent, opinions about my job, opinions about what cars we drove, where Lucy went to daycare, how much we spent at Christmas, and whether Daniel was thinking long-term. Once at Thanksgiving, she watched me put my purse on the back of a chair and said, "Well, there goes another square foot of your future house." The purse had cost $40 at TJ Maxx. I'd owned it for 4 years. I laughed then. I'd laughed at a lot of things I shouldn't have. "So, what exactly did your father tell her?" I asked. Daniel sat on the arm of the couch. "Everything." That turned out to mean more than I'd realized. A few months earlier, Robert and Patricia had sold the big colonial they'd lived in for more than 30 years. Their new condo was smaller, easier to manage, and according to Patricia, more civilized than maintaining half an acre for no reason. After the sale, Robert had told Daniel privately that he wanted to give both him and Melissa an equal amount of money. Now, instead of waiting until some future inheritance, not millions, nothing dramatic, enough to matter, enough to change the timing of our lives. Daniel and I had been saving for years. His father's gift finally pushed us over the line. We found a 3-bedroom house in an older neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Brick front, fenced yard, original hardwood floors upstairs. The kitchen was outdated, and the basement smelled faintly like somebody's 1978 bowling shoes, but it was solid. Lucy loved it immediately. She walked into the smallest bedroom, pointed at the maple tree outside the window, and said, "This one is mine. We were supposed to close on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas." Patricia knew none of it. "Dad asked me not to tell her yet," Daniel said, because he gave me a look. "You know why?" "Yes," I said. "I'd like to hear you say it." He sighed because he knew she'd make it a war. There it was. Everybody knew. Everybody adjusted. Everybody waited for the weather system named Patricia to pass through. What did she think the money was going to be used for? Mostly Melissa. I wasn't surprised. Melissa had been separated from her husband for 7 months and was burning through savings faster than she liked to admit. Legal fees, rent on a new place, 2 teenagers, 1 car payment she couldn't really afford. Patricia had been quietly covering things. Robert didn't mind helping Melissa. What he minded was the assumption that everything left over from the house sale should simply become Melissa's emergency fund. So, he split some of it equally, I said. Right, and she thinks I talked him into giving you your share. Pretty much. I leaned back. Of course she does. Daniel's phone rang. We both looked at it. Mom. He let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Mom. I could hear Patricia immediately. Not the words, the tone. Sharp, fast, offended. Daniel stood and walked toward the kitchen. I followed. What do you mean how much? He said. Dad gave me what he wanted to give me. Patricia's voice rose. Daniel held the phone away from his ear. I could make out one sentence. She put him up to this. Daniel looked at me. For years, that kind of accusation would have gotten a tired smile out of him. Maybe an eye roll. Maybe later he'd tell me. Don't take it personally. This time, he said. Claire didn't make Dad give me anything, Patricia answered. Daniel's mouth tightened. No, Mom. Another burst. Then came the line I'd heard more times than I could count. You've changed since you married her. Daniel went still. I waited. He said Claire didn't make me leave last night. You did. Silence, then the call ended. Daniel stared at the phone. She hung up. Shocking. He gave me a look. I wasn't in the mood to be generous. He sat at the kitchen table. I know this doesn't fix anything. No, I'm trying. I know. And I did know. That was the uncomfortable part. He had done the right thing the night before. He was doing the right thing now. But I wasn't going to turn one decent 24-hour period into amnesty for 12 years. I sat across from him. You were there for me last night. He nodded. I'm not going to pretend you weren't. He looked relieved for half a second. Then I said, but last night didn't start last night. The relief disappeared. Good. Not because I wanted to punish him, because I needed him to understand. Patricia hadn't built that kind of contempt in one dinner, and families don't learn that one person is safe to insult overnight. Before Daniel could answer, the doorbell rang. Robert stood outside holding 2 shopping bags and looking 10 years older than he had on Christmas Eve. He came in quietly. Lucy ran toward him. Grandpa. He smiled, and for a moment he looked like himself again. Hey, Peanut. He'd brought the presents they'd left behind. He sat on the floor with her, while she opened a stuffed dinosaur and a set of magnetic tiles. Then, when Lucy got distracted building something that looked like a collapsing hospital, Robert came into the kitchen. I'm sorry, I looked at him. He didn't say for Patricia. That mattered. I should have stopped it sooner. Yes, I said. He nodded. No argument. Then he looked at Daniel. Your mother wants me to take the money back. I almost laughed. Can she? No, that answer came fast. The gift was mine to make. It's done. Then what's the problem? Robert rubbed a hand over his jaw. The lender still needs the final gift letter. I remembered the paperwork. Mortgage lenders like to know whether a large chunk of your down payment came from a loan, a gift, or a suitcase you found behind a bus station. Robert had already provided most of what they needed. Apparently, one final signed statement was still outstanding. The loan officer emailed it yesterday, Daniel said. Robert nodded. I was supposed to sign it this morning. I looked between them. And Patricia knows that. Yes, of course she did. Robert gave a humorless little laugh. She told me if I sign one more thing for you two, I shouldn't bother coming home. Daniel leaned back. Dad, I know. No, I don't think you do. Robert looked at him. Daniel's voice stayed calm. If you want to change your mind about the gift, say that. But don't tell me Mom scared you into it. Robert flinched. Not dramatically. Just enough. I suddenly understood that this wasn't really about our mortgage paperwork. Not for Robert. He had spent most of his adult life avoiding moments exactly like this one. Patricia pushed. Robert softened, everybody else adjusted. It was almost a family business model. I asked, when does the lender need it? Daniel checked his phone. Tomorrow morning. And if they don't get it, they may push closing. May depends on underwriting. Robert stared at the table. I could see exactly what was happening in his head. Go home. Keep Patricia calm. Tell Daniel the closing can wait. Tell everybody it's just a few days. Call that peace. I stood. Robert, he looked up. I'm not asking you to fight your wife for me, I know. But if you promised your son something, then you need to decide whether your word changes because Patricia gets angry. Daniel glanced at me. Robert was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. I'll take care of it. He left 20 minutes later. For the rest of Christmas morning, nothing happened. No signed letter, no call. By late afternoon, Daniel was pacing between the kitchen and living room. "Maybe we should just delay," he said. I looked at him. What? The house a few days, let this settle down. There it was. The old instinct. Wait until Mom calms down. Let everything else move around her, I said. If we delay because we want to, fine. He stopped pacing. But if we delay because your mother frightened your father out of signing one form, then nothing has changed. Daniel didn't argue. That was when his phone buzzed. An email. He opened it. For a second, he just stared at the screen. Then he turned it toward me. The signed gift letter was attached. A minute later, Robert called. Daniel answered on speaker. His father sounded tired but different. I signed it. Daniel said, "You okay?" Robert exhaled. "Your mother gave me an ultimatum, and I decided I'm too old to keep pretending an ultimatum is a conversation." I looked at Daniel. Robert went quiet for a second. Then he added, "I should have learned a long time ago that peace you buy with somebody else's dignity isn't peace." That was the first time I heard Robert say something that made me think maybe Christmas had broken more than one old habit. It also made me wonder how many others were still waiting to come apart. The signed letter should have made me feel better. For about 12 hours, it did. Then the loan officer called the morning after Christmas and reminded me that buying a house is apparently the financial equivalent of being searched at the airport. "We have the gift letter," she said, "and underwriting is reviewing the updated file. I just don't want to promise Friday until they sign off. So, we're not cleared to close, not yet." I looked across the kitchen at Daniel. He was making coffee and pretending not to listen. "What happens if they don't sign off today?" "We'd probably need to push closing, probably. My least favorite word in the English language when money is involved." "Okay," I said. "Call me when you know." After I hung up, Daniel slid a mug toward me. "Could be worse." That's what people say immediately before something gets worse. He almost smiled. Almost. The truth was, I wasn't worried that Patricia could somehow steal the house out from under us. She couldn't. What bothered me was the familiar pattern. She got angry, and suddenly everybody else's schedule changed. Robert had spent Christmas being threatened in his own home. Daniel and I were talking about delaying a closing. Melissa was calling relatives, and Patricia, as far as I knew, was sitting in her condo, furious that the rest of us had somehow ruined her holiday. Around 11, someone knocked. Daniel looked through the front window. "Melissa." "Oh, good. Maybe she's selling cookies. Want me to tell her to leave?" I thought about it. No. Melissa was standing on the porch in jeans and a long gray coat, looking nothing like the woman who'd been needling me across Patricia's Christmas table. "Can I come in?" "Depends on what weather your mother sent you." She didn't. I stepped aside. Daniel took Lucy upstairs to get dressed, which I appreciated. Whatever Melissa wanted, I didn't want my daughter sitting in the middle of it. Melissa stayed standing. I came to say I'm sorry, for which part she winced. "Fair enough. For Christmas. That narrows it down to about 6 things, Claire." I waited. She finally said, "I should have done something when Mom hit you." "Yes." I froze. So did everybody else. I know. There wasn't much to add. She sat on this edge of the couch. I didn't think she'd do that. Neither did I. And what she said about Lucy was disgusting. I looked at her carefully. That was the first time anyone besides Daniel or Robert had said it that plainly. Then Melissa ruined the moment. "I just wish none of this money stuff had happened at the same time." There it was. "What money stuff?" She looked at me like we both knew. "Dad giving Daniel all that money. He gave you the same amount." "That's not the point." "It feels fairly close to the point." She stood again. "You don't understand what's happening with me." "Then explain it." So she did. Her separation was uglier financially than she'd admitted. Her husband had moved out. Attorneys were involved. Their oldest needed braces. The lease on her SUV had turned into another problem. Patricia had been telling her for months not to worry. "We'll take care of you." Melissa had heard that as a promise. Then she found out Robert had divided the money equally. "I thought there'd be more available." "She admitted for you." She looked away. "Yes, at least she said it." I softened a little. Not because she was entitled to Daniel's share, because fear makes people ugly sometimes. I'd been afraid of money before. Most adults have. "Melissa, your father didn't take something from you and give it to Daniel." "I know." Do you? She nodded. Then she said something strange. Moms never really thought this was about money anyway. What does that mean? Melissa hesitated. Do you remember when Daniel turned down Uncle Rick's job? Of course I remembered. It was maybe 8 years earlier. Daniel's uncle owned a larger electrical contracting company 2 counties over and had offered Daniel a supervisory position. Good salary, company truck, also long hours, family politics, and an uncle who thought weekends were a rumor. Daniel said, "No, Patricia blamed me." She said, "I didn't want him working with his family." Melissa nodded. Mom still talks about it. I know. Melissa rubbed her palms against her jeans. You didn't tell him to turn it down, it wasn't a question. No, I know. I stared at her. How? How? She looked toward the stairs. Daniel told me, when back then, something inside me went very still. He told you he said he didn't want Uncle Rick as his boss. He knew they'd end up fighting. And you knew that for 8 years. Melissa's face tightened. I didn't think it mattered this much. I gave a short laugh. Your mother has used that job as Exhibit A in the case against me for almost a decade. I know, apparently everybody knew except the defendants. Claire, did Patricia know? No. Did Daniel ever correct her? Melissa didn't answer. She didn't need to. Daniel came downstairs a few minutes later. He saw my face, then Melissa's. What happened? I looked at him. Did I make you turn down your uncle's job? He stopped. Melissa stood. I should go. Yes, I said you should. The front door closed behind her. Daniel stayed near the stairs. No. What? You didn't make me turn it down. Did your mother think I did? Yes. Did you know she thought that he rubbed the back of his neck? Yes. There are moments in a marriage when you discover something enormous. This wasn't one of them. That was almost worse. It was small, cowardly, ordinary, exactly the kind of thing that can sit unnoticed inside a marriage for years. Why didn't you correct her? I thought she'd get over it. She brings it up every Thanksgiving. I know. She told people I was isolating you from your family. I know. She treated me like I stole some great future from you. I know. That third I know. Did it? What else? He frowned. What else have you let her blame me for? Because correcting her would have been uncomfortable. Claire, no, don't Claire me. Answer. He looked toward the floor, and there it was again. Silence, not confusion. Inventory. I felt more tired than angry. You actually have to think about it. I screwed up. That's not an answer. I know. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. Perfect. Daniel sat down at the table. I didn't sit around planning to make you the bad guy. I know you didn't. That surprised him, I continued. You just discovered it was convenient. He looked at me. Neither of us had anything useful to say after that. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang. The loan officer, Claire. Good news. Underwriting has the signed gift documentation. We're working toward Friday. Working toward? She laughed. I know. Mortgage people have commitment issues. That got a reluctant smile out of me. After we hung up, Daniel asked, Good, better. The house was still moving forward. Our marriage felt considerably less certain. That evening, Robert called to check whether the paperwork had gone through. I thanked him. He said, You shouldn't have had to worry about it. Then he paused. Claire, I'm sorry about more than the form. I didn't rescue him from the silence, he continued. I've spent a lot of years telling myself Patricia calms down faster if nobody pushes back. She? No, that answer almost made me laugh. Robert sighed. I think maybe everybody else just got quieter. After we hung up, I found Daniel in the kitchen loading the dishwasher badly. I watched him put a saucepan where plates belonged. Under normal circumstances, I would have fixed it. I didn't. Tomorrow, I said. I want the whole list. He turned. What list? Every decision your mother blamed on me that was actually yours. He stared at me for a second, then nodded. Okay. I went upstairs. For the first time since Christmas dinner, Patricia wasn't the person I was most angry with, and somehow that frightened me more. The next morning, Daniel made the list. Not on paper. That would have been almost funny. We sat at the kitchen table while Lucy watched Bluey in the living room, and my husband walked me through 12 years of decisions I'd apparently made without knowing it. Thanksgiving at your mom's, he said. I stared at him. My mother had just lost Dad. I know. Patricia had complained for months that I'd pulled Daniel away from his family that Thanksgiving. You wanted to go? I said. Yes. Did you tell her that he looked down at his coffee? No. I nodded. Next. The Outer Banks trip. That one took me a second. Hated that rental house. I did. You said sharing 2 bathrooms with 14 people wasn't a vacation. I remember your mother told everyone I wouldn't let you go. I know. There was that phrase again. I pointed at him. You're going to have to retire those 2 words for a while. Fair, he continued. Daycare had been his preference too. His mother wanted to watch Lucy 3 days a week after she was born. Daniel didn't want our childcare arrangements tied to whether Patricia was happy with us that month. He'd never told her that. Then there was the down payment offer. 3 years earlier, Patricia had offered us money toward a house. I'd remembered refusing it together. What I had forgotten was why Daniel had been so adamant. She wanted her name involved somehow, he said. And she kept talking about having a key. I remember the key. She said if she helped buy the place, she shouldn't have to call before coming over. And you said no. Yes. But she thinks I said no. He nodded. I sat back. You let your mother believe I rejected her money because I didn't want her in our lives. I did. Why? His answer took a while. Then he said the ugliest truthful thing he'd said yet. Because it was easier when she was mad at you than when she was mad at me. I looked at him. He didn't soften it. Didn't add, but didn't tell me he'd been protecting us. Good. Because he hadn't. I know, I said. He looked surprised. That's the problem, Daniel. He rubbed both hands over his face. I was a coward. Yes, I thought I was keeping things from blowing up. You were? He looked at me. They just blew up on me instead. That one hurt him. I could tell I wasn't trying to hurt him. I also wasn't going to make the truth prettier, because he finally had the courage to look at it. Around noon, I packed a small bag for Lucy. Daniel appeared in the bedroom doorway. Where are you going, Susan's? For how long? A few hours, maybe dinner. His expression changed. Are you leaving? I'm going to Susan's, you know what I mean? I zipped Lucy's little backpack. No, I'm not announcing a divorce 2 days after Christmas. He exhaled. But I need some room. Claire, I told you everything. I know, and I'm trying to fix it. I turned toward him. Walking out of your mother's house was the first right thing. He waited. It can't be the only one. He nodded slowly. I kissed his cheek before I left. That confused both of us. Marriage is inconvenient that way. You can be furious with somebody and still love them enough to notice they haven't eaten lunch. Susan had known me for 17 years, possessed the rare gift of letting me talk without turning my life into a courtroom drama. She gave Lucy apple slices and peanut butter, poured me coffee, and said, "So, what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Good," I frowned. "Good. People make terrible decisions when they decide they need an answer by Tuesday." That was Susan. Very comforting, provided you didn't require actual comfort. Later that afternoon, Melissa called. I almost ignored it. I answered mostly because I wanted to know whether Patricia had sent her again. She didn't, Melissa said immediately. You've developed mind redating. No, you've developed a tone. Fair. She asked how Daniel and I were doing. I should have said fine. Instead, I told her the truth. I don't know if I trust him right now. Melissa was quiet. I get that. I love him. That's not the issue. What is I need to know whether he's actually changing, or just reacting because Christmas got ugly. I looked through Susan's kitchen window. Lucy was in the backyard, trying to put a scarf on Susan's extremely patient Labrador. I need some room to figure that out. Melissa said she understood. That should have been the end of it. An hour later, Daniel called. Did you tell Melissa you're leaving me? I closed my eyes. No, Mom just called and said you're planning to take Lucy and leave. I knew immediately. Melissa, apparently. I hung up and called her. She answered with Claire. I can explain. Never a promising opening. You told Patricia I didn't say you were leaving him. You told her I needed space. She was upset. She kept asking what was going on, and I and you carried information straight back to her. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Melissa, you keep saying you don't want to be like your mother. Silence. Then stop carrying information back to her. She didn't defend herself this time. I'm sorry. I believe you. That seemed to surprise her, but don't do it again. When Lucy and I got home, Robert's car was outside. He was sitting with Daniel in the kitchen. I wanted to talk to you, he said. Daniel started to stand. Robert shook his head. No, you should hear it too. He looked at me. I owe you an apology. For Christmas. For a lot longer than Christmas. He told me that for most of his marriage, he'd treated Patricia's anger like a kitchen fire. Smother it fast. Don't ask what started it. If she was angry at Daniel, Smooth it over. If she was angry at Melissa, fix the problem. If she was angry at me, apparently the easiest solution was to tell me not to take it personally. You didn't keep the peace, Robert, I said. He looked at me. You just kept moving the discomfort onto whoever complained the least. He sat with that, then nodded. You're right. My phone rang before I could answer. The loan officer. I stepped into the hallway. Claire, you're clear to close Friday morning. I actually leaned against the wall. Really? Really, 9:30. Bring your IDs and prepare to sign your name approximately 800 times. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had since Christmas Eve. When I returned to the kitchen, Daniel could tell from my face. We're cleared. We're cleared. He stood and hugged me. I let him. For maybe 30 seconds, the whole mess felt smaller. We had made it through the paperwork. Robert had stood by his word. Daniel was finally telling the truth. Maybe Patricia had finally realized she'd gone too far. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. He read the message. His eyebrows lifted. What? He handed me the phone. It was from Patricia. I was wrong. I want to apologize to Claire. Please bring Lucy tomorrow. I read it twice, Daniel said quietly. That's something it was. Patricia Bennett did not say I was wrong, not in my experience. Maybe Robert had gotten through to her. Maybe Christmas had frightened her too. Maybe losing control for once had forced her to look at herself. I wanted to believe that. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Daniel's Aunt Carol. After some awkward Christmas small talk, she said, I hope you and Patricia can work this out. She's devastated. I imagine everybody is. She says you won't let her see Lucy. I looked at Daniel. Carol continued, she thinks you're using the baby to punish her. There it was. I thanked Carol and ended the call. Daniel didn't ask. He'd heard enough. I handed him his phone back. Your mother's apology isn't an apology. His shoulders dropped. No, she wants access. He sat down. For once. He didn't tell me to give Patricia a chance. He just said, then she can explain herself in front of everyone. I looked at him. Everyone. Everyone who was there. Robert nodded slowly. Maybe that's what should have happened years ago. I wasn't excited about another Bennett family gathering. The last one had gone exceptionally badly, but this time Lucy wouldn't be there. And this time, I wasn't going to sit quietly while everybody else decided what had happened to me. We met the next afternoon at a restaurant. Robert chose about 15 minutes from his condo. Neutral territory. That was my condition. My other condition was that Lucy wouldn't be there. Susan had her for the afternoon, and when I dropped her off, Lucy barely looked up from the dollhouse long enough to say goodbye. I was grateful for that. Whatever happened at that table, my daughter had already attended one Bennett family meeting too many. When Daniel and I walked into the private dining room, everyone else was there. Robert, Patricia, Melissa, Daniel's Aunt Carol, and his cousin Mark, both of whom had been at Christmas dinner. Patricia looked behind us. Where's Lucy? Not hello. Not how are you. Where's Lucy? I took off my coat. She's not part of this conversation. Patricia's lips tightened. I thought the point was to put this family back together. The point is to talk about what happened. I know what happened. Good. That should save time. Daniel glanced at me. I wasn't trying to be funny. It just came out that way. We sat. Nobody ordered food. Some poor waiter came in with menus, took one look at the room, and apparently decided bread service wasn't worth dying for. Patricia started. I asked everyone here because I want to apologize. I waited. She folded her hands on the table. I'm sorry things got so emotional on Christmas. I kept waiting. Apparently, that was it. Melissa looked down. Daniel said, Mom, what? That's not an apology. I said, I'm sorry. For what? Patricia looked offended by the question for everything getting out of hand. I finally spoke. You hit me 3 times. Her eyes moved to me. Yes, Claire, I lost my temper. You hit me 3 times, I heard you. Then say it. Robert shifted in his chair. Patricia looked around the table, maybe hoping somebody would rescue her. Nobody did. Fine, I shouldn't have slapped you. 3 times, I said. Oh, for God's sake. There it was. The apology had lasted about 40 seconds. Patricia leaned back. You and Melissa were arguing. You were disrespectful in my home. I reacted badly. Melissa looked up. Mom, don't put me in this. You were there. So was everybody else. Patricia ignored her. I've already admitted I shouldn't have lost my temper, but Claire has spent 3 days acting as if I attacked her for no reason. Daniel said, There is no reason that makes hitting my wife okay. Patricia turned to him. I am talking to Claire. No, Daniel said. You're talking about my wife, there's a difference. I didn't look at him, but I heard it. Patricia did, too. She changed direction. And this ridiculous accusation that I called Lucy trash needs to stop. My stomach tightened. You did? No, I was angry. I pointed toward the door and told you to take your things and leave. I stared at her. That wasn't even close to what she'd said. You pointed at Lucy. I did not. Yes, you did. I think I would remember. Melissa spoke before I could. Mom. Patricia looked at her. You pointed right at Lucy. The room went very still. Patricia blinked. Melissa swallowed. You said take that trash and get out. You were looking at her. Melissa. Stay out of this. I was sitting 6 feet away. You were upset. So was Claire. That doesn't mean she imagined it. Patricia stared at her daughter, like Melissa had switched languages mid-sentence. Then she looked at Robert. He didn't help. That was when Patricia stopped apologizing altogether. You know what she said? I'm tired of being made into some kind of monster, because Claire is sensitive about where she came from. There it was, the old weapon. Class, my childhood, the little duplex my parents rented, my father's work shirts, my mother's coupons. Things Patricia had never insulted directly enough for Daniel to call cruel, but never subtly enough for me to miss. She has always had a chip on her shoulder, Patricia continued. From the beginning, Daniel had opportunities before he married her. He could have gone into business with Rick. No, Daniel said it quietly. Patricia stopped. What? Claire didn't make me turn down Uncle Rick's job. Patricia frowned. I know what happened. No, you don't. He leaned forward. I didn't want the job. I didn't want Uncle Rick as my boss. Claire told me to make my own decision. Patricia looked at me, then back at him. Daniel continued. She didn't make me skip the Outer Banks trip either. I didn't want to go. Daniel and Thanksgiving at her mother's my decision. Patricia's face had changed. The daycare thing, me turning down your down payment offer, also me. She stared at him. Then why didn't you tell me? Daniel was quiet for a second. Because I was a coward. Nobody moved. He looked at me before continuing. I let you blame Claire because it was easier than having you angry at me. Patricia shook her head. That's ridiculous. No, it's true. So now you're blaming me for your marriage problems. Daniel almost smiled. No, I'm blaming myself for mine. That shut her up for a few seconds. Then she turned back to me. Apparently, everybody has decided you're completely innocent. I didn't say that. Then what do you want, Claire? I want you to stop lying about Christmas. I am not lying. Patricia and Lucy is 3 years old. She doesn't even understand what I said. That did it. I heard my own voice before I had time to manage it. She watched you hit her mother 3 times. Nobody at the table moved. Even Patricia went quiet. I lowered my voice. She didn't need to understand the word. She understood you were pointing at her. She understood you were yelling. She understood everybody at that table was afraid to stop you. Patricia's face wrined. Stop making me sound like some monster. Then stop asking us to rewrite Christmas. She pushed her chair back. I'm done. Robert said, Patty, no. Apparently, this is a trial now. She stood and grabbed her purse. Then she looked at Daniel. Come on, we're leaving. Daniel didn't move. Patricia waited, Daniel. He remained seated beside me. I'm sitting with my wife. I've known my husband for 14 years. I've heard him say more impressive things, more romantic things, certainly longer things. Nothing ever meant more to me than those 5 words. Patricia stared at him. So this is what she wanted. No, Daniel said. This is what I should have done years ago. She looked at me. What exactly are you demanding? I'm not demanding anything. You're keeping my granddaughter from me. For now, yes. Her mouth opened. I kept going. If you want a normal relationship with Lucy again, you need to acknowledge that you hit me. You need to acknowledge what you called her, and you need to stop treating every decision Daniel makes as something I did to you. Patricia gave a bitter laugh. So I have to beg. No, I shook my head. You have to take responsibility. She turned to Robert. I saw the old reflex in her face. Fix this. Robert didn't. Instead, he said, You threw a 3-year-old out of our home on Christmas. I did not throw Lucy. I was there, Patty. She stopped, Robert continued. And while we're clearing things up, Daniel's money stays with Daniel. Melissa stays with Melissa. I'm not taking anything back. Patricia looked around the table. For once, there was nobody left to rearrange reality for her. She picked up her coat and walked out. Nobody followed. The door closed. For several seconds, all I could hear was the restaurant music coming faintly through the wall. Melissa looked at me. I should have stopped her on Christmas. Yes, I said. She nodded. And I shouldn't have told Mom what you said about Daniel. No, I'm sorry. I believed her. That didn't magically repair anything. But it was honest. I appreciate you saying it. Robert stared at the empty chair where his wife had been. Daniel reached under the table and took my hand. This time, I let him keep it. The next morning at 9:30, we were supposed to close on our house. A week earlier, I'd thought signing those six would be the biggest decision I made that month. By then, the house was almost the easy part. The harder question was whether Daniel and I could build something different inside it. The next morning, I signed my name 27 times, I counted. Our loan officer had warned me it would feel like 800, so 27 seemed almost reasonable. Daniel and I sat side by side in a conference room at the title company, while a woman named Joanne slid papers across the table and explained taxes, escrow, insurance, and several other things I would have sworn we'd already discussed 6 times. Lucy was with Susan again. I was grateful. Buying a house is exciting for adults. For a 3-year-old, it's mostly watching your parents sign paper while being told not to touch a stapler. Joanne handed Daniel another document. He signed it, then passed the pen to me. No more hiding behind you, he said quietly. Joanne glanced up. I imagined she'd heard stranger things at closings. I looked at my husband. Then don't, I signed. That was it. No grand declaration, no promise that everything between us was suddenly fixed. Just 2 people putting their names on the same page and understanding that the harder agreement wasn't written there. By lunchtime, we had the keys. When we picked Lucy up and drove to the house, she screamed before Daniel had completely stopped the car. My tree. She meant the maple outside her bedroom. She ran through the front door, up the stairs, and directly into the smallest bedroom. This is mine. Daniel leaned against the doorway. We gathered that. She pointed at the window, and the tree. The tree is outside. My tree is outside. Apparently, property law worked differently when you were 3. We ate pizza on the living room floor because our furniture wasn't coming until the next day. There were cardboard boxes everywhere. No curtains and one light fixture in the hallway that made a faint buzzing sound. It was perfect. Not because it was some dream house. It wasn't. The kitchen cabinets were older than our marriage, and the upstairs bathroom had a blue sink that looked like it had survived several presidential administrations. But nobody could walk through the front door because they believed family entitled them to do it. That afternoon, Daniel came back from the hardware store, holding 2 extra keys. He put one on my key ring. Then he held up the other. Who gets this one? I looked at it. 3 years earlier, Patricia had offered us down payment money and talked about her future house key before we'd even looked at a house. I opened the kitchen junk drawer. Nobody yet. Daniel dropped it inside. Works for me. Patricia didn't speak to me for almost 6 weeks. She spoke about me quite a bit. I know because relatives have a remarkable ability to deliver information nobody requested. One aunt called Daniel to say his mother was heartbroken. Another said Patricia felt we'd taken her granddaughter away. Daniel stopped explaining. That was new. He'd say, Mom knows what happened or she knows what she needs to do. Then he changed the subject. He didn't say Clare isn't comfortable. He didn't say Clare thinks we should wait. He didn't make me the border guard anymore. They were his boundaries, too. Robert changed in quieter ways. Patricia tried using him as a messenger at first. Your mother wants to know if Lucy can come over Sunday. Daniel asked, Does Mom have my number? Robert laughed. Point taken. A couple of weeks later, he told us he'd started seeing a counselor. I was surprised. So, you and Patricia are going together? No. He shook his head. This one's for me. He said he'd spent 45 years believing that avoiding conflict made him easygoing. His counselor had apparently introduced him to the inconvenient possibility that sometimes it just made him unavailable. I liked my version better, he told me. I bet. Melissa and I took longer. She apologized again for repeating what I'd told her. I accepted it. That didn't mean I started calling her every afternoon. Trust isn't a light switch, but she stopped defending Patricia automatically. and I stopped assuming every phone call from her came with an agenda. During her separation, she also began handling more of her own financial problems instead of letting Patricia promise to fix everything. We became civil, then occasionally friendly. For sisters-in-law, that qualified as significant progress. Patricia finally called me in February. "Can we meet?" I almost said no. Instead, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses. Public, neutral. Old habits die hard. She arrived before me. For the first 10 minutes, she talked around Christmas. She'd been under stress. Melissa's separation had worried her. Selling the old house had been emotional. She'd had wine. She felt excluded from Daniel's plans. I listened. Then I picked up my purse. Patricia stopped. "Where are you going home?" "I haven't finished." "I think you have." She stared at me. I stood. Then she said, "Claire." Something in her voice made me wait. She looked down at her coffee. "I hit you." I sat back down. She swallowed 3 times. I said nothing, and I called Lucy trash. There was a long pause. There isn't an excuse for either one. That was all I'd wanted from her. Not humiliation, not begging. Reality. "Thank you for saying what actually happened." She nodded then, because she was still Patricia. She waited approximately 15 seconds before asking, "When can I see Lucy?" I almost smiled. "Daniel and I will talk about it." She didn't like that answer, but she accepted it. The first visit was the following weekend, 1 hour at our house. Daniel and I were both there. Patricia brought Lucy a coloring book, and to her credit didn't arrive with a truckload of guilt disguised as presents. Things weren't magically normal afterward. Sometimes Patricia slipped. She'd criticize something I cooked, or tell Daniel what we needed to do with the yard. "Now," Daniel corrected her. "Mom, we're good." Sometimes she'd get irritated. Sometimes we'd end the visit. She learned slowly. So did we. By the following Christmas, I decided I wanted to host dinner. Not 20 people, not a performance. Just Robert, Patricia, Melissa, and her kids, Susan and us. Halfway through dinner, Lucy knocked over the cranberry sauce. It slid across the tablecloth in one spectacular red wave. Everybody froze. Even I did. Patricia looked at the mess, then at Lucy. Lucy looked terrified. Patricia stood, grabbed a dish towel, and said, "Well, that's why somebody invented washing machines." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Robert laughed too. The room relaxed. And no, that moment didn't erase the Christmas before. I didn't want it to. For years, I'd confused endurance with maturity. I thought being a good wife meant absorbing one more insult because answering back might make dinner uncomfortable. Daniel thought being a good son meant keeping his mother calm. Robert thought being a good husband meant preventing arguments. Melissa thought accepting Patricia's help meant accepting Patricia's version of everything. We had all called it peace. Mostly it was fear with better manners. Later that night, Lucy stood in front of our Christmas tree hanging ornaments. She put one silver star about 3 in from the floor. Daniel bent down and moved it higher. Lucy frowned, took it off, and put it right back where she'd had it. I said I'd leave it. Daniel raised both hands. "I'm learning." After everyone went home, I was putting away leftovers when I opened the kitchen junk drawer. The spare key was still there. Patricia didn't have it. Robert didn't have it. Melissa didn't have it. Maybe someday somebody would. That wasn't really the point anymore. For years, Patricia had acted as if she was deciding whether I belonged in her family. It took me until 44 to understand she'd been asking the wrong question. I already had a family. And this time, nobody else got to decide what happened inside its front door. If you've ever had to draw a boundary with someone you still loved, you probably know it isn't as simple as walking away. Sometimes the hardest part is learning how to stay without disappearing. The helicopter blades cut through the cold November air like a verdict. My father's forks stopped halfway to his mouth. My mother's laughter died in her throat. For one full second, nobody at that Thanksgiving table breathed, because none of them knew who I really was. They thought I was just the daughter who took the bus. I hadn't been home in months. And the first thing I noticed walking through my parents' front door was how little had changed. The same beige walls, the same smell of my mother's cornbread stuffing, the same ache in my chest that showed up every single time I crossed that threshold. Like my body remembered things my mind had tried to bury. I'd come straight from the airport, still in plain civilian clothes, jeans, a gray sweater. No insignia, nothing that hinted at who I'd become. That was intentional. I'd learned a long time ago that showing up in uniform only invited questions I didn't want to answer at a dinner table, where the real questions never got asked anyway. Madison arrived 20 minutes after me, and the whole house shifted around her, like gravity had changed direction. I heard the SUV before I saw it. That low, expensive purr crawling up the driveway, brand new, still had the paper plates. My father was out the door before she'd even parked, waving his arms like a man greeting a returning war hero. "There she is," he said loud enough for the neighbors. "Look at this thing, look at this beauty." Madison stepped out in heels that probably cost more than my last month's rent, laughing at something Daniel said, flipping her hair like she was walking a runway, instead of a gravel driveway in Ohio. My mother was already at the door, or hands pressed to her chest, eyes shining. Robert helped with the down payment. She announced to the room to me to nobody in particular, like it was information I needed and hadn't asked for. Wasn't that generous of him? I said it was. I meant it mostly. I've never begrudged Madison the things she has. What I've struggled with quietly for years is the space those things seem to take up. How a new car could fill an entire room while I stood in the corner of it invisible. Dinner started the way it always did. Candles, the good tablecloth, my mother's turkey that she'd been perfecting since before I was born. For a while it was almost pleasant, almost. Then my father, 3 glasses of wine in, turned that familiar bright teasing look on me, the one I'd learned to brace for. "So," he said, setting down his glass with theatrical slowness. "Still taking the bus?" The table laughed. Not crewy, exactly. That was the worst part. It wasn't cruelty. It was casual, like I was a running joke everyone had agreed on years ago and never bothered to retire. "Your sister's got 3 luxury cars now," he went on, gesturing at Madison with his fork like she was Exhibit A, in some case he was building. "3, Alexa, and you're out here catching the 6:15. My mother made a small sound, a laugh disguised as sympathy. "Honestly," she said, shaking her head at her plate. "It's almost sad." I didn't say anything. I've had a lot of practice not saying anything. There's a particular kind of silence you learn in the military. Not the absence of a response, but the presence of restraint. I looked down instead at the watch on my wrist. Plain face-worn leather band. Nothing flashy. Nobody at that table had ever asked about it. If they had, I would have told them it wasn't from a store. It was given to me after an operation I still can't fully talk about by people who understood exactly what I was capable of, which was more, I think, than my own family ever had. Madison caught my eye across the table just for a second. There was something there I couldn't quite name. Not guilt, not quite, maybe discomfort. She looked away first. I was still holding my fork, still working out whether to say something or let it pass like I always did when my phone buzzed against my hip. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me, some old instinct that never fully powers down, told me to check it. One line. No context needed. "Ma'am, the helicopter is ready. We're waiting on you." I felt my pulse do something strange. Not panic, more like recognition, like a door opening onto a room I'd forgotten was still part of the house. I read it twice, then set my phone face down beside my plate, the way I'd been trained to handle information that wasn't for the room. "Everything okay?" My mother asked, more out of politeness than real concern. "I have to go," I said, standing. My father actually laughed. "Go where it's Thanksgiving, Alexa. Where on earth do you have to go?" I looked at him, really looked the way I hadn't allowed myself to in years past. The wine flush in his cheeks, and the pride he wore so easily for a daughter who bought things, instead of the daughter who'd built something out of nothing. "There's something I can't send someone else to do," I said. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't meant to be one. I grabbed my coat off the back of the chair, and for a moment, the whole table just stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. Maybe I had. We'd been speaking different ones for years. I walked out into the cold without looking back, my boots crunching over the frost-hardened grass, my breath fogging in front of me in short, controlled bursts. Behind me, I could hear my father's voice, rising more confused now than angry, asking my mother what on earth had gotten into me. I didn't answer. Some things you can't explain to people who've never once asked the right question. Through the kitchen window, I found out only later from Madison who told me with an odd flatness in her voice. My father watched a military helicopter descending onto the open field just past our property line, its lights cutting white circles into the dark, its rotors flattening the dead November grass in slow, deliberate waves. He told her later that the smile fell off his face like something physical, like gravity had finally caught up to him. He had no idea in that moment exactly how much he didn't know about his own daughter, or how long it had been since he'd bothered to find out. Part 2, the failed daughter. People assume every family has one golden child and one afterthought. Ours did too, and I never had to ask which one I was. It wasn't cruelty that made it that way. Not at first. It was simpler than that, and somehow worse, it was habit. Madison was the easy child to celebrate, and I was the one who required explanation. Growing up, Madison got the private university, the used but still nice sedan for her 16th birthday, the cushion of rent money whenever her paycheck came up short. When she wanted to buy her first house, my parents didn't blink. My father handed over the down payment, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like, that's just what you do for a daughter you believe in. I chose a different road, and I chose it fully aware of what it would cost me. When I told my father I was enlisting, he didn't yell. He just looked at me with this expression, somewhere between disappointment and secondhand embarrassment, and said, "The military isn't a career for a girl like you." I remember exactly where we were standing, the kitchen, late afternoon light, slanting through the window over the sink, because I remember thinking very clearly, he doesn't mean that as an insult. He genuinely believes it. That distinction mattered to me for a long time. It doesn't anymore. I enlisted anyway. The first years were brutal, in ways I don't think civilians can fully picture unless they've lived it. The physical exhaustion that settles into your bones. The isolation, the constant test of whether you're someone who can be trusted with other people's lives. I lived on almost nothing. I sent money home more than once, including one year when my father was underwater on a loan he never told Madison about, because he was too proud to let her see him struggle. I never told her either. That wasn't for her to carry. When I got my first promotion, I called home expecting I don't know what. Some acknowledgement, maybe. My mother congratulated me briefly before pivoting to update me on Madison's new apartment, her new boyfriend, her new life that seemed to unfold in Technicolor, while mine unfolded in the background in grayscale unnoticed. Every visit home followed the same script. Madison would show off a new car. Madison would talk about her latest vacation, some resort with an infinity pool, and a name I'd forget within the hour. And at some point, someone, usually my father, would turn to me with genuine, exhausting concern and ask, "So, when are you going to settle down and live a normal life?" Normal, as if what I was doing wasn't real life. As if guarding a convoy through hostile terrain at 2:00 in the morning, or making split-second calls that determined whether people came home to their families, was somehow less legitimate than a beach vacation, financed by someone else's credit line. I stopped expecting them to understand, somewhere around year 4. That wasn't bitterness. Or it wasn't only bitterness. It was more like acceptance. The same slow acclimation you go through with any loss. I came to understand that my parents didn't hate me. That would have almost been easier in a strange way, because hate at least requires attention. What I understood eventually was quieter and harder to sit with. They had simply never learned to value me. Not because I hadn't earned it, because they'd never developed the eyes to see it. There was a mission years back that I still think about more than I let on. We were pinned down, exposed, and I made a call that most people in my position wouldn't have made, a call that got 4 soldiers home who otherwise might not have made it. Afterward, my commanding officer sat me down and told me plainly that I was being considered for something bigger, a specialized unit, the kind of assignment that changes the entire trajectory of a career. I never told my family, not because I didn't want to share it. Some small, stubborn part of me wanted to badly, but I knew exactly how that conversation would go. I could hear it before it happened. My father's voice already halfway to the only question that ever really mattered to him. Does it pay? Well, that was it. That would have been the whole conversation. Not are you safe? Not are you proud of yourself? Not even what does that mean? Just money. Always money. The currency my family used to measure whether a life counted for something. So I kept it to myself. I let them believe what they wanted to believe, that I was still just their daughter with the modest job, and the modest apartment, and the bus pass, quietly failing to keep up with her sister. It was easier than watching them fail to understand something that mattered enormously to me. I told myself that not needing their validation was its own kind of strength. Some days I even believed it. I was back at my apartment on base, still turning that Thanksgiving dinner over in my mind. Robert's laugh, my mother's little sympathetic sound, the particular sting of being reduced again to a punchline about public transportation when my phone rang. It wasn't the helicopter crew this time. It was Colonel Thomas Reed. And something in his voice, even before he said a word beyond my name, told me this call was different from every other call that had come before it. "Warren," he said, "you've been selected for something. Direct tasking connects straight up to the Department of Defense. I need you to listen carefully, because once I tell you this, there's no unhearing it." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, the same watch from Thanksgiving still on my wrist, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the two halves of my life, the one my family saw and the one I actually lived, pull sharply, unmistakably apart. I flew back to base the next morning, and by the time I stepped off that plane, Thanksgiving already felt like something that had happened to a different version of me. That's the strange thing about living two lives. The switch isn't gradual. It's instant, like stepping through a doorway, and on the other side of it, nobody's laughing about bus routes. If my family could have seen me that week, they wouldn't have recognized what they were looking at. I wasn't the quiet, unremarkable daughter they'd built in their minds over the years. I was standing in briefing rooms, making decisions that mattered, coordinating logistics that stretched across departments most civilians never even hear named. I held a position most people spend an entire career trying to reach, and I'd been trusted specifically with an assignment tied directly to national defense. That helicopter on Thanksgiving night hadn't come to whisk me off somewhere glamorous. It came because there was a window of maybe 6 hours to move on something urgent, and I was one of a handful of people cleared to make the call. While my father was probably still telling the story of my dramatic exit to anyone who'd listened, spinning it, I imagined into something about my flakiness rather than my duty. I was in a secure room doing the actual work of the life he'd never bothered to ask about. He called me twice that week. The first time he was angry, the kind of performative anger that's really just embarrassment, wearing a louder mask. "You made me look like a fool in front of Madison and Daniel," he said, not even bothering with a hello first, walking out like that. What was I supposed to tell people? I didn't argue with him. I found over the years that arguing with my father is like arguing with weather. It doesn't change anything, it just gets you wet. I let him finish, and when he was done, I said the only thing that felt true. "You never needed to know what I do to be proud of me. You just never asked." There was a pause on the line longer than I expected. For a second, I thought maybe something had shifted. Then he sighed, the sound of a man choosing not to hear something, and changed the subject to whether I'd be home for Christmas. I told him I'd let him know. I hung up first, which I never used to do. Back on base, Colonel Reed pulled me into his office for what I assumed would be a routine briefing. Instead, he told me I was being considered for a leadership position that would put me in charge of an entire team. The kind of role that doesn't come around twice. The kind that would have made my younger self the one standing in that kitchen being told the military wasn't for a girl like her want to laugh out loud at the irony. "Before any of that moves forward," he said, sliding a folder across his desk, "you're going to want to deal with this first." I opened it, expecting paperwork. What I found instead made my stomach drop in a way very few things manage to anymore. It was documentation tied to a piece of property land my grandfather had left specifically to me. A piece of inheritance that had sat quietly in the background of my life for years. Something I'd never touched, never needed, never even thought much about beyond knowing it was mine. According to the folder, my father had been quietly working to sell it. I read through the papers twice, slower the second time, because I needed to be certain I wasn't misreading something. I wasn't. Ownership had been transferred, not to a buyer, to Madison. I sat there for a long moment, the folder open on my lap, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not the dull, familiar ache of being overlooked, but something sharper, more specific. Betrayal has a particular temperature. It runs colder than anger. I flipped to the last page, where a signature was supposed to confirm my consent to the transfer. My signature. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering just above the ink, comparing it stroke by stroke against the muscle memory in my own hand. It wasn't mine. The letters leaned wrong. The loop on the A was too wide, too rushed. The kind of mistake someone makes when they're copying a signature from memory, rather than watching a hand actually move. Somebody had forged it, and there were only a handful of people who would have had access to the original documents required to even attempt it. I closed the folder slowly, my hands steadier than I expected them to be, though something inside my chest was anything but steady. "Colonel," I said quietly, "I'm going to need a few days." He nodded like he already understood exactly what kind of few days those would be. Not leave for rest, but leave for reckoning. I sat alone in that office long after he'd gone, the folder still resting on the desk in front of me, my own forged name staring back up at me in ink that wasn't mine, and for the first time since I was a teenager, standing in that kitchen being told what girls like me weren't cut out for, I let myself feel the full undiluted weight of exactly what my family had been willing to take from me. Quietly, calmly, without a second thought, the same way they'd always taken my silence for granted. I didn't call my father that night. I didn't call anyone. Anger, in my experience, makes terrible decisions on its own timeline. And I'd learned a long time ago that the smartest move in almost any situation is to slow down before you speak. So instead of picking up the phone, I picked up the folder again, and I started reading everything in it, like it was a mission briefing, because that's exactly what it had become. What I found over the following days wasn't just one forged signature. It was a pattern, and once I started pulling that thread, it kept unraveling. I learned going back through old bank records I still had access to that this wasn't the first time my contributions to this family had quietly disappeared from the story. For years, my father had a version of events he told relatives, neighbors, anyone who'd listened that Alexa never really helped out. That Alexa was too wrapped up in her own life to think about family. It wasn't true. It had never been true. I'd covered my mother's medical bills more than once back, when her insurance came up short, and nobody else stepped in. I'd paid off a chunk of my father's debt during a rough stretch he never wanted Madison to know about. I'd sent money for a new roof after a storm tore through their street and insurance dragged its feet for months. None of that had ever made it into the family narrative. My father had simply edited me out of my own generosity and let Madison grow up believing I contributed nothing, while she was the one who received everything. Madison, to her credit, started putting pieces together on her own. I don't think she'd known about the forged signature. I want to believe that, and mostly I do. But once rumors started reaching her, once she realized the property now sitting quietly under her name had a far messier history than she'd been told, I could hear the fear creep into her voice on the phone. "Alexa, I didn't know," she said, and there was something almost childlike in how fast she said it, like she was 15 again, and caught doing something she couldn't undo. I swear I didn't know Dad did that. I believed her mostly. But belief and responsibility aren't the same thing. And I told her that gently, because some truths only land if you deliver them without a blade in your voice. Daniel, for his part, wanted the whole thing buried. I heard secondhand that he told Madison the smartest move was silence. Let it blow over. Don't rock the boat. Don't give Alexa a reason to escalate. It was such a predictable response from a man who'd built his entire identity around never having to answer for anything. But I wasn't interested in revenge in the way people usually mean it. I didn't want to watch my father lose everything. I wanted something harder to give someone, and harder to take the truth laid out plainly in a room where nobody could rewrite it afterward. I hired an attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Carol, who'd spent 20 years untangling exactly this kind of family mess, Together we built a file real documented undeniable bank transfers, dates, the forged signature verified by an actual expert this time, not just my own eye. Every dollar I'd quietly sent home over the years, finally given a paper trail instead of living only in my memory. When I finally sat my parents down, I brought none of the anger I'd felt alone in that office. My father predictably got there first. "What is this?" he said, staring at the folder like it might bite him. "Are you seriously going to sue your own parents?" "No," I said. "I just want everyone in this room to look at what actually happened, not the version you've been telling people." "What actually happened?" He called it revenge. Said, I was trying to punish him, humiliate him, make him small in front of the family he'd spent his whole life trying to look good in front of. I didn't raise my voice. "Revenge would be wanting you to lose everything. Dad, I don't want that. I want you to stop saying, 'I never did anything for this family.'" That silenced him, if only for a moment. Carol chose that exact moment to slide one more document across the table. Something she'd uncovered digging into the financing behind Madison's third car. A detail that revealed my father hadn't been quite as honest about where that money had come from as he'd led everyone to believe. The room went completely still. My mother's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Madison's face drained of color. And my father, the man who once asked me, laughing if I was still taking the bus, stared down at proof of his own dishonesty with an expression I'd never once seen on him before. For the first time in my life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. I decided not long after that meeting that I was done hiding who I actually was. For years, I'd let my family believe in a smaller version of me, mostly because it was easier than watching them fail to understand the real one. But I was tired of easier. Easier had cost me more than I think I'd ever let myself admit. There was a ceremony scheduled at base, a formal recognition event, the kind with folding chairs and flags, and a program printed on heavy card stock honoring a handful of us for work most people would never fully understand. Some of which still couldn't be discussed in detail even there. On a whim, I hadn't fully examined. I put my parents' names on the guest list. They came expecting very little, I think. My mother told me later she assumed it would be a small gathering, some minor recognition for administrative work, the kind of thing you attend out of politeness and forget about by dinner. My father wore his good jacket, the one he saves for events he considers slightly beneath him, but socially necessary. I watched them find their seats from across the room, still in plain clothes myself, blending into the crowd the way I always had at family functions. Then it was time, and I walked to the front in full dress uniform, every insignia in place, every year of service visible in a way I'd never once let them see up close. I watched my father's face change in real time. It wasn't dramatic, no gasp, no dropped jaw. It was quieter than that and somehow more devastating. It was the look of a man doing math he'd never bothered to do before, recalculating in real time exactly who his daughter was. Colonel Reed spoke next, and he didn't hold back. He talked about missions I'd led, decisions I'd made under pressure most people never have, to face the trust command had placed in me over years of proving again and again that I could be relied on when it mattered most. He wasn't performing. He meant every word, and the senior officers in that room nodded along, like it was simply plainly fact. My father sat very still through all of it. I could see him working to reconcile the daughter he'd spent years quietly dismissing, the one who still took the bus. The one who never seemed to measure up to her sister's spreadsheet of accomplishments, with the woman standing at the front of that room, trusted with things he couldn't begin to picture. Madison cried, not politely, not photograph-ready tears, but real ones, her shoulders shaking, one hand pressed over her mouth. Afterward, she told me that in that moment, sitting in that folding chair, she finally understood that nothing in her garage could ever be weighed against what I'd given up quietly for years, while she was busy being celebrated for driving something new off a lot. After the ceremony, my father found me near the exit away from the crowd. And for once, he didn't lead with a joke or a comparison or anything designed to make himself look good. "I didn't know," he said, "just that, no preamble." "No," I said, "you never asked." He tried to apologize properly, then fumbling through it in a way I'd genuinely never seen from him before. This man who always had an opinion, Ready? A joke. Ready? A story about Madison Riddity? He had nothing rehearsed this time, and somehow that made it land harder than any polished apology could have. I didn't forgive him. Not there. Not yet. I told him as gently as I could manage that an apology doesn't erase years of being made to feel like an afterthought in your own family. Some wounds need more than words to close. He nodded like he understood that, or was at least willing to sit with not understanding it fully yet. We were still standing there, the crowd thinning around us when his phone rang. I watched his expression shift as he answered the family attorney I learned later, calling to inform him that the entire property transfer, the one built on my forged signature, was now at serious risk of being unwound entirely, with consequences neither of us had fully discussed yet. He put the phone away slowly, and for the second time that day, I watched my father's certainty about his own life crack just slightly at the edges. A year passes differently when you spend part of it rebuilding something instead of just enduring it. By the time Thanksgiving came around again, so much had shifted in that house that walking through the front door felt almost like visiting a different family entirely. The Snorts, same faces, the same furniture, but something underneath it all had been quietly recalibrated. I came that year as something new, at least publicly. The local veterans community had invited me as their guest of honor for a small gathering earlier that week, and word had traveled the way it does in small towns. But I didn't walk into that dinner wanting to prove anything. I wasn't there to perform my accomplishments the way Madison used to perform her purchases. I just came as myself, finally, without editing. Madison had sold 2 of her 3 cars by then. She told me about it herself, without me asking, in a voice that had lost some of its old performance and gained something steadier in its place. She'd started paying her own bills in full, she said. No cushioning from our father, no quiet transfers to smooth things over. It wasn't easy for her. I could see that in the small, tired lines around her eyes that hadn't been there the year before. But there was something in her posture, too. Something that looked less like a woman trying to keep up appearances and more like a woman finally standing on ground she'd built herself. My mother had grown quieter over the year in a way that felt less like sadness and more like listening. She used to fill every silence at that table with updates about Madison's latest purchase. This year, she mostly just watched and asked me real questions: how I was sleeping, whether the new position was manageable, whether I was taking care of myself. Small things, but small things coming from her felt enormous. My father had aged in ways that had nothing to do with the calendar. There was a heaviness in how he moved, now a carefulness in how he chose his words, like a man who'd finally learned that words have weight and consequences, and had decided belatedly to start carrying that weight properly. Partway through dinner, in a lull between courses, he looked at me across the table and said quietly enough that it felt like it was just for me, "Do you remember when I asked if you were still taking the bus?" "I remember," I said. He looked down at his plate for a moment before continuing. "I used to measure people by what they had: cars, houses, how big a splash they made walking into a room." He shook his head slowly. "I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was wrong about that most of all. I didn't need him on his knees. I never had. What I'd needed for years, without fully knowing how to ask for it, was simpler than that. Just for him to understand, finally, that a person's worth was never something you could read off a price tag or a garage door. You don't have to say all that," I told him. "I just want you to actually believe it." "I do," he said. "I finally do." Later, after the plates had been cleared and the conversation had drifted into easier, warmer territory, I handed him a small box I'd brought with me, wrapped simply, no ribbon. He opened it slowly, the way people open things when they suspect it might matter more than it looks. Inside was the watch. The same one I'd been wearing that first Thanksgiving, the one I'd looked down at while he laughed about bus routes, the one that had been given to me for reasons he'd never once asked about. "You used to think this was worthless," I said. "Just an ordinary watch, on an ordinary daughter's wrist." He turned it over gently in his hands, like he was trying to understand it now, the way he should have understood it then. "It reminds me," I said, "that time eventually shows everyone exactly who a person really is. It just takes as long as it takes. He was quiet for a long moment holding it. Then, almost sheepishly, he reached for a second, smaller box. I hadn't noticed he'd brought something he'd clearly been holding on to, waiting for the right moment. Inside was an old photograph of creased at one corner of me as a little girl, maybe 7 years old, grinning gap-toothed at the camera in a way I barely recognized in myself anymore. I don't know where he'd kept it all those years, or why he'd chosen tonight to finally bring it out. But when he looked up at me, his eyes were wet in a way I had never once seen from him in 32 years. And for the first time since I could remember, my father cried in front of me without trying to hide it. This last chapter isn't really about vindication, even though I know that's what a lot of people watching this might be waiting for. It's about something quieter than that. Something harder to package into a satisfying ending, but truer, I think, to how real change actually happens in a family. I didn't come out of that year transformed into someone who needed to prove a point. I didn't buy a bigger car or a bigger house, or start posting proof of my rank to anyone who doubted me. That kind of victory has always felt hollow to me, even when I imagine it. I stayed mostly exactly who I already was. I still walk when I can. I still take public transportation when it's convenient, not because it's all I can afford, but because it's simply how I choose to move through the world. That distinction matters more than people realize. One afternoon that spring, my father happened to be downtown when I stepped off a city bus near the courthouse. My bag slung over one shoulder in no particular hurry. He was crossing the street the other direction and stopped when he saw me, genuinely surprised. Like some old reflex in him still expected the sight to mean something it no longer did. "You still take the bus," he said. Not a joke this time. Just an observation delivered carefully, like he was testing the words for sharp edges before letting them fully out. "Sometimes," I said, and I smiled, because there was no sting left in the question anymore. It had been drained of its old power somewhere over the past year. The way old wounds sometimes just quietly stop hurting when you're not paying attention to them anymore. He laughed. Then a real laugh. Nothing performative about it. "I think I finally get it," he said. "Get what?" "A person can drive the most expensive car in the city," he said, "and still not be going anywhere that matters." I didn't say anything back. I just hugged him right there on the sidewalk in the middle of an ordinary afternoon that neither of us would have predicted a year earlier. It wasn't a hug that erased everything that came before it. The years of being overlooked don't just dissolve because someone finally sees you. But I'd made a decision somewhere in the middle of all of it not to let those years keep steering the rest of my life. Some things you forgive because the other person has earned it. Other things you release simply because you're tired of carrying them, and you decide quietly that you deserve to put them down. Not long after that, I received orders for a new assignment, the leadership position Colonel Reed had mentioned months before, finally officially mine. The helicopter came again, the same way it had, that first Thanksgiving night. Blades cutting through the airlights, sweeping across the ground. But this time, my parents weren't inside, watching through a kitchen window. Confused and a little embarrassed. They were standing right there beside the field, watching me walk toward it. And for the first time in my life, my father wasn't uncomfortable about what people might think. He stood up straight, the way I imagine he must have stood as a much younger man, before life had taught him to measure things the way he eventually did, and he said loud enough for me to hear it clearly over the noise. "I'm proud of you." I turned back just before I climbed aboard. "Thank you, Dad." The helicopter lifted off into the gray morning sky, and as the ground fell away beneath me, I found myself thinking about that very first Thanksgiving, about the version of my father who once laughed at a daughter for taking the bus, and the version standing on the ground, now finally understanding what he'd been looking at all along. They used to think I was poor because I rode the bus. What they never understood was that I never needed an expensive car to prove I had value. I only ever needed to know who I was. And I'd known that quietly, steadily, long before any of them finally caught up. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own family, your own quiet years of being overlooked, or maybe even someone you owe an apology to, I'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from tonight. We've got so many more stories like this one waiting to be told. So, if you don't want to miss the next one, go ahead and subscribe. Let's keep this journey going together.